Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Terrance Dean. I'm an assistant professor here at Denison University. The work that I do, the research that I do, extends to Allensworth, California. One of the co-founders, particularly, which happens to be William Payne, who is a Denison University graduate in 1906. We tell this story of William Payne as I want to illustrate what it means to be home or locating a place called home. Often, as part of the American nostalgia, we fancy concepts and themes of home, a place where we can claim as a starting place, some form of identity of our location in America. We often return home as it provides memories, but more so, it is our story. It has a beginning, and home helps us to place a marker on our beginnings. And this is where this American odyssey begins for the hundreds of Black families of Allensworth, California, who unfortunately do not and cannot claim inheritance to a home that their ancestors created for them. In 1908, William Payne, like so many other exodusters who migrated to California, along with the Colonel Allen Allensworth, relocated from Ohio as a teacher to California seeking greater opportunities. Following in the footsteps of Booker T. Washington, who encouraged many other African Americans who were fleeing the South, but also building on Booker T. Washington's notion of comeuppance, but also building and having self-reliance for Black people in America. Booker T. Washington, who also founded Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University, encouraged many Black Americans to go west. California would be the new odyssey for so many who were seeking refuge, a safe place, a haven, a place to call home. Following this, William Payne took his family and his two little daughters, his wife and his two daughters, to California seeking opportunities as a teacher. He arrives in 1908 in California, in 1906, in California. And there, when he applies to become a teacher in the state of California, they deny him a teaching license. We all understood that the tentacles of Jim Crow South had unfortunately made its way west. And this is where the story begins for William Payne and the Colonel. And in 1908, inspired again by the message and the economic self-sufficiency of Booker T. Washington, Colonel Allen Allensworth of Kentucky, one of the most distinguished Black men in the U.S. Army, along with Ohio educator William Payne, these two men set out to establish a town where, quote, African Americans would settle upon the bare desert and cause it to blossom as a rose, unquote. The American dream was within reach for them. They had beaten the odds against the ills of Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and segregation by migrating from the Midwest to California to build a home. And I want to read something very briefly from Allensworth, which is why I think this is more crucial and more important to this testimony and this story. In 1908, with William Payne and Colonel Allen Allensworth decided to co-found the town of Allensworth, Colonel Allensworth was so excited, he wrote to Booker T. Washington the following letter, and I quote it at length. He states, I take great pleasure in informing you that I have just completed an organization to be known as the California Colony and Home Promoting Association. The object of this association is to unite with you in creating favorable sentiment for the race. One of the chief purposes of this association will be to mold public opinion favorable to intellectual and industrial liberty. To this end, I have secured over 9,000 acres of the richest land in Central California, where the colony will be located on the main line of the Santa Fe Railroad. A town will be established upon the most scientific bases and improved methods of a city and of buildings. As it is just as cheap to build right as wrong, we will commence with the ownership of public utilities. We intend to demonstrate to the world that we can be and do, thus meeting the expectation of our friends and to encourage our people to develop the best there is in them under the most favorable conditions of mind and body. This we have in California, as you are aware. It is my desire to have our streets given names of historical and educational value. And in the midst of this city, we will have a lake surrounded by a park to be named, if you have no objection, Washington Park, in honor of the greatest Negro sentiment maker in the world. Have you no objection? Respectfully yours, Allen Allensworth. Now, of course, Booker T. Washington turned down something like that, right? Who would not want to have a park named after them? And particularly someone who was one of the most critical voices of African Americans and comeuppance during our time. However, the story would take a tragic turn once settlers began settling within Allensworth. But let's talk about the glory moments of Allensworth. The town, which served as a transfer point on the Santa Fe Railroad, it was the only transfer point from Los Angeles going to Fresno, going towards the Bakersfield, went up towards to Oakland. Travelers would stop, transfer, and visit Allensworth, purchasing goods and services in the town. Allensworth was anchored by over 800 acres devoted to cultivating sugar, wheat, barley, cotton, and poultry, and that was sold to neighboring towns along the Santa Fe Railroad. The colony would soon become a depot for grain, for cattle merchants, and those who provided a steady stream for business for their hotels, their restaurants, their livery stable. And only a year after its founding, they had a post office. Now, here's where the story takes a very unique turn as well. By 1912, Allensworth was made into a voting district and a school district. And with $5,000, around $300,000 in today's dollars, they built a 2-room public school. And William Payne, who was denied his teaching license when he first arrived in California, would now become the first teacher and principal of the Allensworth School. He had received his teaching license. So they did exactly what Booker T. Washington encouraged them to do. They followed the American dream. They created a colony just for themselves to help preserve not only for themselves, but others to come along after them. So in addition to becoming their own independent town, they had a functioning general store, a drug and pharmacy store, a hotel that housed travelers and transient business people. In essence, it was a shining example of Black self-sufficiency and prosperity. And unfortunately, that would be its biggest problem. As Allensworth prospered, the town became the target of various different business interests. Now, originally, when they bought the land through their own private company from the Pacific Farming Company, the Pacific Farming Company and the Pacific Water Company had promised Allensworth 10 wells, just as they did the other neighboring white towns. Unfortunately, Allensworth only received 4 wells. Those 4 wells would not be able to sustain a growing colony that was moving quickly and growing fastly. So they sued the California Farming Company as well as the Pacific Water Company in order to regain ownership of those wells, but also to get additional wells. Well, unfortunately, Pacific Water Company did not enact or give them their additional wells, but they did, were sued and they lost the litigation, and they did have to turn over the wells to Allensworth. And unfortunately, the town was not able to build enough and sustain itself because they didn't have the adequate filtering pumps and all the other necessary equipment because the Pacific Farming Water Company had not provided them with those resources. Another key element that happened during the time, the Santa Fe Railway. As I mentioned earlier, it was the only stop along the way from Los Angeles to Oakland. Additionally, what happened is that the Santa Fe Railway, they had petitioned the colony members of Allensworth, is it possible that we can hire Santa Fe Railway any Black persons? Because at that time, they had not any Black persons working on the Santa Fe Railway. And Allensworth was the most popular stop So they asked if they could hire someone to ride that line, or at least hire someone Black to be a ticket agent to take tickets at Allensworth. Santa Fe Railway denied that request. But what they did do is they built another depot stop in Alpal, the neighboring white town. And with that, the trains began to divert all services, preventing any economic continuance of self-sustaining sustainability at Allensworth, moving all of its visitors to Alpal. That would decimate the community of Allensworth. So denying the town access to water, which was critical, and the water table, it continued to decline, and a more developed water supply would have been necessary to sustain this town. And unfortunately, because of the Pacific Farming Company failures to dig necessary wells to provide other essential infrastructure improvements, the citizens of Allensworth, unfortunately, did not have the wherewithal for their farmers and agricultural sustainability to help the town continue to grow. With the Santa Fe Railroad continuing to divert its trains from Allensworth to Alpal, it also decimated the community's economic sustainability. And this is one of the other critical components, is unfortunately in 1919, the colonel himself was walking in the streets on a business trip in Los Angeles, California, and was struck and killed by a motorcyclist. It was discovered that the motorcyclists were two white men who had struck the colonel. They don't know what the charges were, or if any charges could be found, if it was malicious intent, but unfortunately the colonel would die the next day of his injuries. What does this mean when we talk about home? Home for those who were in a community living the American dream. Just as sure the Black communities of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Rosewood, Florida, and those who massacred those communities by white mobs who were angered by Black thriving and success and achievement, Allensworth unfortunately suffered their fate through the destructive practices in a systemic manner, economically and of infrastructure through the transportation industry. How do we reconciliate and help those who have moved on, the descendants who are still living, many of them in the California area, who are seeking some type of sustainability to remind themselves of the community of their forefathers and their foremothers who created a place called home that you know of as Allensworth. When we think of reparations, we think of those who have been disproportionately economically, judiciously, and politically disenfranchised by a system based on race, culture, and other markers which deem them inferior. Those persons in Allensworth were displaced from their land, a land that they bought legally and with hard-earned money. Although, unfortunately, through racist and implicit biases based on race, it does not mean that it is a forfeiture of their land. But what it does mean in today's terms is a reclamation, a returning, a sojourn to those and the descendants of Allensworth. Thank you for your time.